for the National Hurricane Center, as of the last advisory, is a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane. And what happens after that? Really tough to say at this point. There are a lot of possibilities, ranging from raking right along the coast to going back out to sea, and then we'll see, and then heading possibly into Louisiana. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen after this weekend. We'll see if and or when it does develop. If you look closely, you can kind of see some of that turning down to the little bit lower levels. These thin wispy clouds are higher up in the atmosphere, but down here around the center, starting to see a little bit of a spin associated with it. You don't see any rain here, but there is rain there. The radar's just not detecting it, and because it's too far away, essentially. The European model and the GFS both show some very heavy rain. So if you're along the Texas coast or Louisiana coast, heads up, because this shows a lot of rain offshore and quite a bit of rain in Texas. Now, the GFS model also shows parts of South Texas, the coastal areas, getting very, very wet. So that's really the only spot where they go over, they overlap. So there's still not a lot of confidence, but you know, the closer you are to it, the more likely it's going to be. And it does look like it's going to turn that way, at least for a little while. So big heads up as far as the rain goes. Steering pattern is going to make a big difference. So exactly what's going on in the upper levels with this high, is it strong? Is it weak? Will depend and have an influence on where it ultimately goes, which could be tropical storm and eventually Hurricane Beta. We are under the Greek alphabet now. We've used up all of the names. National Hurricane Center has used up all of the names for the 2020 season, now onto the backup list. So much uncertainty still in the longer range here. Is it going to stay on land or, Julie, possibly back out into the Gulf and go somewhere else?
Remains to be seen. And Sally's devastating blow to the Gulf Coast will make recovery a long process to come. Take a look here at the scope of the damage. This is Perdido Key, Florida. Homes here not only missing roofs, but their second stories even. And then you see all that debris littering the ground. Look at that, just a collapsed wall there. In Gulf Shores, Alabama, long lines of drivers waiting to fill the gas tanks of their cars here. A lot of them are out of luck, though. Even when the gasoline arrives, in some cases there's no electricity, so you can't pump the gas right into the vehicles. You have to use those canisters. Sally is now pushed east off our shores, and this new video coming now from the Outer Banks of North Carolina. You can still see some cloudy skies, some rough surf being kicked up there as well. Buxton, one of the places along the East Coast, seeing the last traces of Sally. Many saying good riddance, right? We look, though, at just some of the destruction left behind from Sally earlier this week, and we take a look here at Fort Morgan and Peninsula. This is Alabama. This is the before, and I want you to notice all of these docks here in the water, and then we look at the after, and it is a very different situation here. We see certainly most of this being kind of wiped away here. A lot of these just kind of washing out, and then a lot of roof damage here. This roof completely lifted off, roof damage here as well. So definitely quite a blow here in this particular area. Here's another before and after from Sally. This is Gulf Shores, Alabama before. Looks like a resort, some kind of apartment complex maybe. And then after, we take a look at the image here, and it does look pretty dramatic as well. See lots of debris strewn about here in the parking lot area, a lot of debris in this particular area here, and then it looks like a lot of erosion as well. A lot of that sand has been washed away here as a result of Sally. One more real quick. This is Gulf Shores before and then Gulf Shores after. Again, clear to see the debris strewn about and all of the damage this storm left behind.
Center Live, I'm meteorologist Chris Warren in the lab tracking the tropics and the Gulf of Mexico once again. Something ready to develop. Tropical depression 22, 35 mile per hour TD, tropical depression with pressure at 1005 millibars. It's moving to the north-northeast at 7 miles an hour for now. It does look like it will take a turn to the west and bear down on Texas. Whether or not it gets to Texas, whether or not it hangs out around Texas for a few days, that still remains to be seen. It's also possible it'll go back offshore as well. So this is, I would say, to put it simply, it's weird. It's a weird one. It's a tough one. And we're going to see. I mean, kind of like this whole season has been, and nothing should surprise you now. And this weekend, we're going to have a dip in the jet stream. Now, How strong those winds are going to be, how far south they end up going will be a factor. How strong or how weak this high pressure will be a factor. If it's a weaker high pressure, the system is more likely to go to the north. And a stronger high pressure system likely not to do much. Just hang out and fester, possibly drift to the west. So we'll see on that. Here's one possible outcome. This isn't our official forecast. It's just one of the possible scenarios. The European forecast does take it like the conventional wisdom right now, taking it into the southern coast. But then from there, doesn't quite really make a landfall. Or if it does, it stays on land and goes up the coast into Louisiana. So again, Julie, that's just one possible outcome out of all of this.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. You know, it's not just the tropics, but we're also dealing with those fires on the West Coast. Tensions are rising as residents there are displaced by the wildfires. They're growing impatient. And now that some fires have moved well past the evacuated areas, many evacuees want to return. The Weather Channel's Justin Michaels explains the importance of evacuees staying put for now.
Frustrations are growing at the Lakeside Market in Oroville, California.
It's just, we don't know what to do, you know?
This place is now the base of operations for hundreds waiting to get back to Berry Creek, a small mountain town of 1,200 nearly leveled by the North Complex fire last Tuesday.
So yeah, it's frustrating not even be able to go look.
Police are stopping everyone, including residents.
We don't know if we need a motel for a couple days or if it's going to be a couple weeks or a month.
It wouldn't do anyone any good to go into an unsafe situation.
As stressful as it may be, CAL FIRE says keeping people away is an important part of the recovery process for now.
The fire front may have moved on, but it takes a long time for the material to finish burning out.
Making streets like these incredibly dangerous, as flare-ups are still possible. Utilities need to be deemed safe, and hotspots need to be put out. We see it time and time again covering wildfires in California, how the fire almost discriminates against some houses. Here in this residential section of Berry Creek, California, you can see house after house, car after car, property after property, completely laid to waste by the flames. With the exception of the neighbor at the end of the street, it's almost as if their house wasn't even touched. Of the more than 1,100 structures destroyed, more than 700 were homes, including that of Donald Wise.
I just moved my stuff last month.
Now, we all talk about how bad 2020 has been. Well, for Donald, it can't get much worse.
Yeah, so pretty much lost everything.
Including his wife earlier this year.
She passed away in June from cancer.
A man dealing with 2 impossible situations in 3 months.
It's hard to have any emotion, really. It's just like kind of numb, you know, at what's been happening.
Getting back to Berry Creek has more meaning to Donald than possibly anyone else who call this mountain home. He's looking for just one thing.
I know the ashes of my wife are, you know, I mean, that's just not going to survive. It's just going to be mixing with the rest. So that would be the main thing, is try to get her out there, because we were supposed to take her back to Hawaii, and we're going to spread our ashes back in Hawaii. So
a reality Donald knows will likely never happen. Just one more unthinkable story of tragedy from the California wildfires.
It's just like kind of a numb feeling, like, all right, what's next?
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
Just devastating there. Now, the region has been getting a little bit of rain, not a whole lot, but places like Portland picked up their first measurable rain in about a month. See a little bit of lightning showing up here on live radar as well. That is not what we want. The rain will take in small doses because if we get too much too fast, that's an issue when it comes to those burn scar areas and in the landslides. But in the lightning, we don't need any more of because of the triggering of yet more fires. So this is a situation right now. Right now, we did get a 1.4 inches here. Also just north of Eugene, 0.3 inches. Again, in some of these areas, there's been no rain in a month or more, maybe since even more than that, maybe a few months. So again, any little bit here, it does, I think, even psychologically help just a little bit here. Rain to come over the next 7 days. Well, here's a look at it. Now, we're going to get a bit of a dry spell after this initial little push, and then by late next week, it looks like some more rain will start to work its way in. Could see even a little bit more coming in over the latter part of next week. So again, don't want it all at once, but every little bit at least helps in this situation here. We'll be back with more on your tropics next.
Today, we'll be watching eastern parts of Texas. Thunderstorms are going to begin to fire up.
A high risk of tornadoes in Dallas today. Definitely a big concern.
Not only could we see large hail and damaging winds, we could also get tornadoes.
Look at that tornado. Wow. I was right in the path of a monster EF4.
It's heading right for town.
This thing is huge. It's like it's alive.
Those people got to get out of here.
The roof was already coming off our house.
There's debris!
I felt myself flipping 3 times.
There it is right there.
That was the moment I accepted death.
How do you prepare to get hit by a tornado? How do you prepare to not be alive?
Be sure to catch the all-new episode of Deadline to Disaster. That's Sunday night at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, right here on the Weather Channel. All right, ours on TD22 right now. We are looking at this tropical depression here in the Gulf of Mexico right now. It's a 35-mile-per-hour storm. Not all that organized right now. You'll notice this big sort of blob of moisture here off to the north and northeast of it. So creating some showers and thunderstorms right there. It's still well out to sea, about 275 miles off the Mexican coast right now. But we are concerned that this one could have some impacts to initially, well, Texas, and then maybe beyond that, the Gulf Coast. Looking at right now, some of that rain starting to work its way on shore here in Brownsville, Texas. But again, the bulk of it is still out over the open water right now. Really, the uncertainty here is pretty great. We have a lot of atmospheric factors that are going to be steering this system, and with that we could have some very different outcomes. So high pressure here to the east. Now if this is a weaker high pressure, that's basically going to pull that system up to the north there. We're kind of in the middle of these two high pressures, and our jet stream is also a factor here. Now if this is a stronger high pressure, well, that's going to steer it more toward the Texas coast and the Mexican coast as well. So where this lands is still a bit uncertain as it continues to evolve. So we look at the cone of uncertainty, as we call it, and it's quite large at this point. Kind of looks like a big balloon. So looking at this forecast, looking at perhaps a hurricane here by Sunday evening with a 75-mile-per-hour storm, maybe approaching Corpus Christi, Brownsville, and beyond that, well, we could even be involving cities like Houston when it comes to the impacts. So the rainfall could be a major impact. 3 to 5 inches of rain could come in a very short amount of time to a city like Houston, which doesn't handle the flooding all that great. Corpus Christi, Brownsville, some higher totals possibly coming your way, maybe upwards of 8 inches or so of rainfall. So there's still a lot to be worked out with this system. Flash flooding is a threat along the coastal areas. This will go all the way through Monday up toward Galveston, from Galveston back to the Mexican border here at this point. But really, beyond that, it's very uncertain what happens with this system. You know, we could see some of those impacts in places like Houston. well, then it could actually maybe come back out over sea. It could actually impact the Louisiana area. It could impact the Florida Gulf Coast. At this, Chris, there are a lot of factors that really remain to be seen with this one. So it's the one that's going to keep us on our toes, I'm afraid.
That's right. And there are other things, too, that you might not be able to actually see that can create something right at your toes that can be dangerous. And what I'm talking about here, Julie, is out in the Atlantic, sometimes hundreds of miles away, there could be a big storm that kicks up some big waves. And there is expected to be some big waves and a high rip current risk as well for here, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And what's generating this? A major Category 4 hurricane with 130-mile-per-hour winds, Hurricane Teddy. And here's Puerto Rico right here. So this storm, these strong winds spinning around at 130 miles an hour, is pushing water. And that water is going away from this storm in the form of swells, and then eventually in the form of some waves and rough surf. So where's this going? Puerto Rico, heads up, you are close enough to the cone that you might as well be in it. I say that because a third of the time, the center, roughly a third of the time, the center of the storm goes outside of the cone. And even if it goes right down the middle, or even if it were to go right down the middle, there's still, it's a big enough storm that there's going to be some wind and rough surf and some heavy rain likely for Bermuda. And then it heads up into Canada. We're feeling more confident that that is going to be the case, but it's still worth watching. And if you're on the southeast coast, the mid-Atlantic, all the way up into the northeast, and if you have plans at the beach, big heads up, because life-threatening rough surf and rip currents is something that is possible out of this. Just looking at some of these wave heights, they're not going to be this high when they get to the shore, but boy, you're seeing up there close to 30, even 40 feet. These are some huge swells being generated by this storm. So it looks like this low should protect us, this dip right here, but stay tuned to the Weather Channel for the very latest.
As far away as the mid-Atlantic coast, twin legacies of Sally, the latest hurricane to hit our shores. What's left of Sally has now moved off to the east, but you can't let your guard down this tropical season.
You can't let your guard down this tropical season because of this. Here in hurricane season, there's a tropical depression, a hurricane, tropical storm, post-tropical, subtropical area to watch. Whew, and probably more. See more flare-ups over Africa, but it's close to home where things can catch us off guard in a hurry and they can strengthen quickly. We've seen that time and time again. So a lot to get to here, Julie. TD22 and Hurricane Teddy, the closest ones.
Yeah, in Houston, you need to watch this one, TD22. You could be in its path. In fact, the system threatens not only the Texas Gulf Coast, but that danger could even extend into the northern Gulf Coast. Just ahead, why we're not ruling out the coasts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or the Florida Panhandle for this one. Welcome back to Weather Center Live, and this is the one I am talking about. In the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, a 35-mile-per-hour storm, still about 275 miles off the coast of Mexico. A lot of flare-ups with this just to the north of it and the east of it, and some lightning out over the open waters as well. A lot of unknowns with this system. It's very close, obviously, to the U.S. It is in the Gulf of Mexico, and usually anything, once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, well, it has to go into land, right? So we look here at what's currently happening with this, and we are seeing, as I mentioned, some lightning, some flare-ups here on the northern and northeastern side of it right now. Some rain also associated with it, just barely reaching the extreme southern Texas coast near Brownsville right now. Other than that, it is the big question, you know, over the next couple of days is where does it go and who does it impact, right? And right now we have a very large cone of uncertainty here. This is looks like a giant red balloon here. We're talking about from Mexico and Brownsville, basically all the way over to Louisiana. You could be dealing with the impacts from this system, which, by the way, could become a hurricane. So this, and if it does, that would be beta in the Greek alphabet. So just a crazy year overall in terms of the tropical season. But right now, the expectation that we, by Sunday evening, could be dealing with a Category 1 hurricane as it is still out over the water. But maybe by Monday morning, if it comes in contact with land still holding together at 75 miles per hour, that's a hurricane. And we're talking about Brownsville, Corpus Christi, Houston, all kind of in that general zone, Chris. Really just depends on, how it holds together, how it gets steered, whether it goes a little farther to the north or whether it gets pushed a little farther to the west. And then the big question is, where does it go after that?
Yeah, will it go east?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that, going west and then going east? So you mentioned the steering. That's what we're going to talk about right now. And we feel, pretty confident in the short term it's going to keep doing what it's doing. That's persistent forecasting. What's happening now is going to keep happening, and that's what we're expecting right now. Still going to the northeast, likely through tomorrow morning. And then there's a pretty big turn to the left there, or turn to the west. And by Sunday evening, the National Hurricane Center has a forecast of 75 miles per hour. That's a hurricane. But after that, watch this. Wow. I mean, usually you would have expected it to go inland, right? That's, based on what typically happens. Well, this is definitely not a typical season by any stretch of the imagination, but the cone grew even in this direction and in this direction. So the confidence is very, very low at this point for early next week. It's only a few days away. Big reason for that is really even until this develops, we don't even know how big this is going to be, but it will be impacted by what's going on in the surrounding environment. So this weekend, here's what's going on. There is going to be some strong upper winds. There's going to be a dip in the jet stream. How strong and how far south will play a role here. And then an area of high pressure. If it's a weaker area of high pressure, the system is more likely to be pulled northward, getting closer to East Texas and Louisiana. Now, if it's a stronger area of high pressure, it's more likely that this system will be protected from any obvious influence. So it's likely to fester, move very little, and maybe and possibly even drift a little bit to the west. So we'll see. And here's another one where it goes west. This is the European model. This is another possibility. Goes west as the forecast currently has it, around Brownsville or Corpus Christi, and then kind of grates up the coast. Okay, so then what? What about Monday, Tuesday? What's going on next week? Well, we're going to have that jet stream that is going to dip. Again, how far south and how strong it's going to be still remains to be seen. But it too will start to lift away. And as it lifts away, the steering, the obvious steering aspect of this goes away. So now what? Is it going to go back to the west, right? Because it may have already gone to the west, then it could go back out over the Gulf, or will it go north, or will it go back closer to the east, into maybe even Florida? And right now, I think it's too early to say exactly, which one has more of a likelihood. We'll have to, day by day, that's how it goes. We just saw this with Sally, how quickly the forecast changes, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. We certainly saw that with Sally. So here's what I was talking about, the European model. This is Sunday, now Monday, making close to landfall, probably a landfall around Corpus Christi. It's what this one model shows. But you see what happened there? It just grated the Texas coastline with wind, rough surf, and some heavy rain before going into Louisiana. That's one possibility. This is not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. What we do feel confident about, though, this is a tropical entity over some very warm waters, a lot of available moisture. There is going to be a lot of rain. The European model shows it. The GFS shows it. Exactly where and how much for any specific location, Julie, of course, that still needs to be worked out.
It does, but one possible destination for TD22 really stands out, and that's the city of Houston. As meteorologist Mark Elliott explains, the city's no stranger to big storms and overwhelming rainfall.
I've lived in Houston for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like this.
Scenes like these are becoming more frequent in and around Houston. Flooding, the city's prone to it. Let's take a look at some of the reasons why it's so vulnerable to flooding. The Houston metro area has grown by a staggering 650% since the 1950s and is now home to more than 6 million people. More buildings. What makes matters worse, Houston has very poor drainage. And in Galveston, if the seawall gets wiped out by a hurricane, without a surge protection system, water would overflow into the city, which could be catastrophic. Storm surge isn't the only problem. Heavy rain from tropical systems or otherwise can cause havoc. For example, in August of 2017, Hurricane Harvey dumped more than 40 inches of rain in just a few days, causing unprecedented flooding. More than 150,000 Houston area homes were damaged or destroyed. Overall costs, $125 billion. Then in April of 2016, a storm caused parts of Houston to get 10 to 15 inches of rain in less than 12 hours, flooding roads, homes, and businesses, and 8 people were killed. Harvey, the April 2016 floods, and the Memorial Day flood in 2015 have already shown how damaging floodwaters can be in Houston, and the city remains a prime candidate for future disasters.
Well, regardless of how TD22 develops, Houston likely to have some heavy rain. I mean, so that's definitely not a good thing, Chris.
But as we were just hearing, the duration too,
Yeah.
right? If you get 12 inches of rain that's spread out over 12 days, that's one thing.
Yeah.
You get it over 12 hours,
Yeah,
that's certainly
story.
something else. Right, and that has a lot to do with how the land handles it. Right. So let's take a look right now at first the rain we've been talking about. So the European forecast model does show a big area of that 12 inches, of a foot of rain. Now, depending on where this ends up going, there is the possibility that this will drop a foot to a foot and a half, maybe 2 feet of rain. Now, at this point, that's offshore. But we'll see if it slowly rakes the coastal areas of Texas. It could be more, right? So we'll watch that. The GFS also paints a picture that shows the storm has the capability of dropping a foot or more of rainfall. But it's going to come down to duration and where exactly it falls. Now, if all of this rain falls over Houston, we know Houston is extremely vulnerable to flooding. Now, big reason for that, the moisture's available. It's there. It's the Gulf of Mexico. And beyond that, the rest of the tropics. So that moisture is there and it's ready to be used as rainfall. Now, urbanization, all of this gray you see here, that means that the water is not going to be absorbed by the soil. It's not going to seep in. It's going to run off the streets, the concrete, the parking lot, and then even the wetlands that are pretty flat. And there's a lot of paved areas, and everything drains very slowly. So the bottom line is it is easy to flood, and it takes a long time for things to drain. The drainage system, the big one here, the water goes into the Houston area, goes out of the Buffalo Bayou there, and then eventually out into the bay, then out into the Gulf. And again, it flows slow. So when we get some very heavy rain, it just takes a while, and you got to be patient. At this point, if this forecast pans out the way it does, I don't think it will be a major issue that will last a very long time. Now, that being said, if you're on this part of Houston down to Galveston, 6 to 7 inches, if that happens very quickly, Julie, there will be some issues, likely some flash flooding. Some of the streams and creeks that tend to respond very quickly will likely flood, but in that case, too, it would usually go away much faster when upstream there's not a lot of water.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I mean, word of another tropical threat, that's just not what anyone wants to hear right now, especially not along the Gulf Coast, places hard hit by Sally. Take a look at some of this. This is Perdido Key, Florida. The water there standing in many of the homes and businesses along the state line in the Floribama community. This is the Old River Grill. It's going to be some time until they're back in business serving up seafood here. 134,000 customers without power as of this morning in western Florida. And across the Perdido Pass Bridge in Orange Beach, Alabama, you're dealing with the damage to the marinas. In the popular tourist spot here, boats are tossed around and some structures have lost their roofs. You can see the debris clearly strewn about everywhere there. The governor asking evacuees to please be patient and not return to those flooded areas just yet. And just look at what the heavy rain from Sally did here in Georgia. Part of this road is just washed away. This is new video out of central Georgia. And in all officials, they say they had to close 6 roads in Monroe County. They do hope to have most of those repairs made over the weekend, but this one they say it's going to take longer. It's a big one. So yeah, all that moisture carried into Georgia and well beyond from Sally. Sally may now be gone, but some communities are just starting to tally the stressful toll the hurricane put all along the Gulf Coast there. Communities seeing the damage caused by things like this. A barge that slammed into the 3-mile bridge linking Pensacola, Florida and Gulf Breeze, Alabama. The Weather Channel's Dave Melkoff went high above the damage to show you what families and even first responders are now up against.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world, now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, you know, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80 foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these 2 homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
All right, so many of you don't have electricity. I know it's hot out there today, still staying hot from Mobile to Pensacola. We're in the 80s up to 90 degrees, so the humidity is still a factor here as well. That's going to get better, though, when we take a look at the coming days and even into the weekend. So we'll take a look at your recovery forecast heading on into tomorrow for you in Mobile. We'll see a few showers here or there. Temperatures are going to fall back into the 70s, though, so that's going to feel good with some of those lows in the low 60s as well, even as we get into the first part of next week. Here in Pensacola, maybe some rain tomorrow and then cooler temperatures for your hard work as well.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
All right, still plenty of tropical action out there. We focus in now on our Tropical Depression 22 here in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this could have some impacts to Texas and beyond as we move through the weekend into the early part of next week. Right now, it's a 35-mile-per-hour storm, 275 miles offshore off the coast of Mexico. A lot of convection firing up here on the north and northeastern side of this. You'll see some of those real tall cloud tops there and a little bit of lightning showing up as well. System still getting its act together at this point, but what is something to watch is, well, where it's heading and who we think might be impacted over the next couple of days, and that would be Texas. So looking here right now at Brownsville, Texas, getting a little bit of the rain associated with this particular system, but our cone of uncertainty with this one is very wide, and for that reason, everyone in this area really needs to be on alert. We're talking about from the Mexican border all the way up through Houston and into Louisiana. Any of these places in between at this point could be feeling the impacts of this. It's a tropical depression now, but it could become a hurricane. So looking at Sunday evening, perhaps a Category 1 hurricane coming into Monday, maybe maintaining its strength, Chris, and remaining a Category 1 as it approaches the Texas coast. There are a lot of unknowns with this one.
But one way we learn more, we find out more about systems like this, like Tropical Depressions 22, like what it is and what it will be, are through the hurricane hunters. And they were flying toward the system this afternoon, but the plane was struck by lightning, so they returned to base. Another crew will fly into the system today. Hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb is talking tropics now about how important those flights are.
The United States has been flying into hurricanes since the 1940s. It all started on a dare during World War II, and now roughly 100 missions are flown each year. Flights last around 9 hours as the crew collects life-saving information over the vast and data-sparse oceans. Our country's Hurricane Hunter fleet is made up of 13 planes, 10 Air Force, and 3 NOAA aircraft. Most of their missions fly directly into the eye of a hurricane. They collect data within the lowest 10,000 feet of the atmosphere with measurements at flight level, advanced remote sensors, and instrument packages called dropsondes. On the way down, dropsondes measure things like temperature, humidity, pressure, and winds every half second until making their final splash into the ocean. The data are relayed directly to the National Hurricane Center, where forecasters analyze the storm's location, strength, size, and structure. If these courageous men and women are willing to fly into hurricanes for me and you, increasing our knowledge and the accuracy of forecasts and warnings, the least we can do is prepare in advance, so we know what we will do when data are flowing from the hurricane hunters.
I'll tell you what, if you're ready to be done with the tropics and the summer heat, we have a treat for you. Fall officially arrives next Tuesday, but you may want to start pulling out those sweaters and coats now. The eastern half of the country already feeling fall-like temperatures. Places like Atlanta, you're expecting a high of just 71 over the weekend. Syracuse, you could shiver to a new record low this weekend. We're talking 30s. Showing up here in upstate New York. So our jet stream is, the pattern here is going to change. It's going to dip, and we've got a lot of nice, comfortable, cool air. In some cases, cold air that's going to be filtering in and as well, along with a front. So with this, we are looking at some really chilly temperatures come tomorrow morning in the Northeast. In fact, we could be setting some record lows, and we're talking 30s. As I mentioned, Syracuse, your record is 34. Going for 37. Binghamton at 35, could see 34 on when you wake up tomorrow morning. Even into Ohio and Indiana, it's going to be downright cold out there across the Great Lakes region, even Detroit. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a chilly pattern setting up. Quiet weather though. Really pretty fall weather by the time we warm up into the 60s in places like Boston, D.C., Chicago come tomorrow. Even as in Atlanta, as I mentioned, much cooler in the 70s. And Dallas, even at 83. So well below average across much of the eastern half of the U.S. The bulk of the hot weather really back in the plains in the central U.S. So It's going to feel nice if you like the fall weather, you're ready for it, you're going to get it. And pretty quickly, summer is just going to kind of exit here. Boston on Sunday, your high is just 57 degrees. So, Chris, I don't know about you. I'm ready for it, ready for that change. And hopefully we can get the tropics to get out of here as well, but I don't think so.
Yeah, unfortunately, just when you're hoping for fall, during fall, we get some bad ones sometimes here. Top of depression, 22. We're onto the Greek alphabet now for the first time and only the second time happening on record. The first, of course, and the only until this year getting into the Greek alphabet was 2005. So expecting beta out of this, we'll see. Tropical depression, 22, 35 mile per hour system here. And as you look at the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center, they're bumping it up to a hurricane by Sunday evening. There's the cone so far. And then this is when things get interesting / frustrating / pull your hair out. It's going to be tough here. Whether it goes right along the Texas coast, it goes inland, or moves out to sea, all still remains to be seen. But impacts expected along the Gulf Coast.
Domino.
New video into the Weather Channel. We'll get back to TD22 and possible impacts to the U.S., but here to Asia and Vietnam is a tropical storm. Mind you, a tropical storm blowing through. And you saw somebody there on a bike or a moped or something. I'm looking at this for the first time here. Right there. It's like a moped perhaps. And look at that. Wow, that looks like a close call and a close call. And it looks like some power lines down. Whoa, more than a close call. Looks like the person's okay. Looks like they got hit, but we're okay and leaving the bike behind. Wow, tropical systems. Again, and we've seen it time and time again. We know how strong storms are going to be, maybe not days in advance, but when they're approaching, we have a pretty good idea how the wind interacts with land, how the wind interacts with vegetation, infrastructure. We can't predict. We know that, you can say right there, the winds we're going to be at, right now they're 35 miles an hour with this TD, this tropical depression, 22. But once this gets on shore in one form, size, shape, or another, how it interacts with land and interacts with people, we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. We can forecast the weather. Again, we can't forecast all the impacts. We can get a pretty good idea. But storms, no two storms are the same. A Category 2 this year is not going to be the same as next year or last year. Size makes a difference. How fast it's moving makes a difference. These things are complicated. There are many, many factors that go into it. Now, you want to talk about complicated? Just the complicated forecast right now after, just talking about, the stuff that we do know. And, it's going to be a little bit longer, frankly, before we know exactly what we have here with TD 22. I feel pretty good that it's going to make a left-hand turn at some point this weekend. And the National Hurricane Center does have this as a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane, so a Category 1 hurricane by Sunday evening. Again, a lot can change. It hasn't really totally gotten its act together yet. But then, boy, the surrounding environment, what's likely to steer this, it's not real obvious. So with that, we can't say with 100% certainty what this is going to do and where it's going to go. But what we do know for sure and feel pretty strongly about, and it's frankly, it's pretty easy to say, it's going to bring a lot of rain somewhere to someone. And the tropical rain that's going to come down with this may amount to feet of rain. Now, that may be out over the ocean. It may be in Texas. The European model shows a foot of rain, even maybe up to 12 to 18 inches around Corpus Christi. You can see that in the S in Corpus, a little bit of pink under there. Now, that's one possibility. Another possibility is the GFS showing, through Tuesday, a foot to a foot and a half for Corpus Christi. Now, I would not say that any one of these spots will get exactly what this map says. But I would say, Julie, it's just by looking at this map, kind of blur your eyes and say, well, both models are showing a foot to a foot and a half of rain. It's going to happen somewhere, but exactly where, that I think still needs to be worked out.
Right, so that is not good news. And Sally's devastating blow to the Gulf Coast will make recovery a long time to come. Take a look at the scope of the damage. This is in Perdido Key, Florida. Homes not only missing roofs, but their second stories in some cases, and debris just strewn about everywhere there. So earlier this week, Sally, just an awful situation there. In Gulf Shores, Alabama, long lines of drivers are waiting to fill the gas tanks of their cars. A lot of them are out of luck, though. Even when the gasoline arrives, there's no electricity, so you can't pump gas into vehicles, you have to put them in those, the gas in those, and then fill up the car. Sally's now pushed east off our shores. Along the Outer Banks of North Carolina, though, you can still see some cloudy skies, some rough surf out there. Buxton, one of the places along the East Coast, seeing the last traces of Sally. And we take a look at some before and after imagery of Sally and what it did. And this is a Fort Morgan, Peninsula, Alabama before. Notice all of these docks here right along the water's edge. We take a look at the after, and you clearly notice the absence of a lot of those. Those are just completely wiped out. Roofs are off of complete homes here as well. So a lot of damage being done here by Sally. Gulf Shores, another area, of course, we're very close to landfall here. This may be some kind of a resort or apartment complex here, and it does look much different, right? After Sally came through, and what's catching my eye here too, a lot of the erosion here as a result of the hurricane coming through. A lot of debris here in the parking lot and roof damage and so on. So again, a devastating storm here in and around the Gulf Shores, Alabama area. We have time for another one here out of Gulf Shores as well. This is a look at the before picture. This appears to be maybe a neighborhood here close to the water. And then we take a look at the after, and look at this over here. Quite a bit of extensive damage here. These couple of homes really just kind of torn apart from the storm. A lot of erosion showing up here as well as a result of Sally. So again, bracing for more tropical activity when we come back.
Back in the cone again. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren. You're watching the Weather Channel here in the lab, tracking the tropics. Tropical Depression 22 as of the 10 o'clock advisory. 35-mile-an-hour depression. And quite a bit of thunderstorm activity happening right here. Still has yet to get its act together enough, get organized enough to become a tropical storm, and the winds aren't there yet either. The official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does bring it to a tropical storm by tomorrow, brings it up to a hurricane by Sunday evening, and brings it closer to the coast of Texas, possibly moving onshore, or at least close to it. Now, by the beginning of next week, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I paused it right here on Sunday evening to show you what the cone does after that. Blows up like a balloon, which means it could go just about any direction. I would say just about any direction but south. It continued on the west, maybe not due west, but perhaps northwest, perhaps north, northeast, perhaps east. Could be back over the water. So a lot going on with this, Julie. The upper level winds, whether or not there's a trough digs deep enough, far enough, strong enough, high pressure strong or weak, all plays into what this will ultimately do. But we also know, regardless, there's going to be some very heavy rain associated with this.
Yeah, more problem with the tropics. And then we have the problem with the wildfires in the west still burning there. Tensions rising as residents are displaced by the wildfires and they're growing impatient. Crews battling those fires have now moved well past evacuated areas, and many evacuees want to return. Weather Channel's Justin Michaels explains the importance of evacuees staying put for now.
Frustrations are growing at the Lakeside Market in Oroville, California.
It's just, we don't know what to do, you know?
This place is now the base of operations for hundreds waiting to get back to Berry Creek, a small mountain town of 1,200 nearly leveled by the North Complex fire last Tuesday.
So yeah, it's frustrating not even be able to go look.
Police are stopping everyone, including residents.
We don't know if we need a motel for a couple days or if it's going to be a couple weeks or a month.
It wouldn't do anyone any good to go into an unsafe situation.
As stressful as it may be, CAL FIRE says keeping people away is an important part of the recovery process for now.
The fire front may have moved on, but it takes a long time for the material to finish burning out.
Making streets like these incredibly dangerous. As flare-ups are still possible, utilities need to be deemed safe, and hotspots need to be put out. We see it time and time again covering wildfires in California, how the fire almost discriminates against some houses. Here in this residential section of Berry Creek, California, you can see house after house, car after car, property after property, completely laid to waste by the flames. With the exception of the neighbor at the end of the street, it's almost as if their house wasn't even touched. Of the more than 1,100 structures destroyed, more than 700 were homes, including that of Donald Wise.
I just moved my stuff last month.
Now, we all talk about how bad 2020 has been. Well, for Donald, it can't get much worse.
Yeah, so pretty much lost everything.
Including his wife earlier this year.
She passed away in June from cancer.
A man dealing with 2 impossible situations in 3 months.
It's hard to have any emotion, really. It's just like kind of numb, you know, at what's been happening.
Getting back to Berry Creek has more meaning to Donald than possibly anyone else who called this mountain home. He's looking for just one thing.
I know the ashes of my wife are, you know, I mean, that's just not going to survive. It's just going to be mixing with the rest. So that would be the main thing, is try to get her out there, because we were supposed to take her back to Hawaii, and we're going to spread our ashes back in Hawaii. So
a reality Donald knows will likely never happen. Just one more unthinkable story of tragedy from the California wildfires.
It's just like kind of a numb feeling, like, all right, what's next?
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
Such a tough situation there. We take a look at the fire weather aspect here, and it does look like some more rain right now continuing to fall. We did get a little bit of rain. Portland, you picked up your first measurable rainfall in about a month. So some rain coming in, also seeing some lightning showing up in and around some of these areas. So that's not what we want to see. The lightning could spark more trouble, more fires. And we have to be careful about flooding too in some of these burn areas also. So at the moment, still getting some rain here. We've gotten near Sweet Home 1.4 inches so far, 0.3 in and around Eugene. So not a ton, but in some cases, the most you've gotten in a very, very long time here coming in. The fires do continue to burn though. We're going to get a break from the rain, and then by late next week, another round, maybe a more potent round of rain coming in as well. So that could help the situation a little bit. But right now, the fire danger still exists for most of Nevada, Utah, Idaho. We saw those red flag warnings up. The air quality is also still very poor, but those humidity levels are starting to come up considerably. So that's some good news. 69% there in Reno, 64 in Burns, even in the 40s back near Ely. So getting better in terms of that relative humidity, and the wind gusts are starting to die down.
So dishless.
We ain't hot, not never in Daytona Beach. We know how to survive.
There are those of us who do nothing and complain. And then there are true heroes like this gentleman who's not going to let a broken AC unit in his car be a problem.
The guy straps a portable air conditioning unit to his back window with the generator on the roof of his car. Now that right there is ingenuity if I've ever seen it.
And in this heat, you can either stay in or stand out.
This is Daytona Beach, so if you're riding the loop, you need something to stand out, right? This guy has it figured out. And he's got air conditioning. Win-win.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, catch this new episode of Weather Gone Viral Sunday, 9 Eastern, 8 Central, right here on the Weather Channel. Okay, still dealing with plenty of action in the tropics. This one close to home here. This is Tropical Depression 22. We are expecting it could have some impacts in Texas and maybe beyond over the next couple of days. So we're looking at a 35-mile-per-hour storm right now, still trying to get its act together, still well out off the coast of Mexico at 275 miles northeast of Mexico. A lot of convection here showing up on the northeastern side of this, some lightning here and some very high cloud tops as well. So a lot of that energy, some moisture associated with it now starting to work its way into South Texas as well. But the real question here is going to be what happens with this. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. I think the one thing we can say, it's in the Gulf of Mexico. It is not going to go south. It's going to go somewhere else, and that's going to interact with land, right? So right now, here are a couple of different scenarios we can point out to you. We do have this scenario where our high pressure off to the east is maybe slightly weaker. Now, if that were the case, with a high pressure parked over here to the west as well, it would tend to go pretty much straight north, okay? So that could mean impacts there to the Gulf Coast, perhaps Louisiana, perhaps Texas as well. Now, what if this was a stronger high pressure? Well, that could help push it a little farther west, perhaps right into Texas. So that is another scenario. It could drift just a little bit farther west. It could also drift into Mexico at this point. Here is our cone of uncertainty. It's relatively big area right now. This would be just over the next couple of days. Brownsville, Corpus Christi could be a hurricane by the time it interacts with land. A 75-mile-per-hour storm by Sunday evening could maintain that intensity as it moves on shore as well. So we're really going to have to really be on alert here all along the Texas coast over the next couple of days here. And we're looking at a place like Houston, which is prone to flooding, could be getting a lot of rainfall. Someone in this zone could be getting as much as a foot of rainfall out of this particular system. And then what it does beyond that is still to remain to be seen as well. So flash flooding anywhere here from Brownsville up to Galveston, maybe beyond that over the next couple of days. Going to have to watch that. This just through Monday. Then once we get past that, it's the question, where does it go next? We could, again, see it get pulled farther north. It could shoot off to the east here and impact the Gulf Coast, or it could go into Mexico, Chris. So again, there is so much uncertainty with this system. The one thing we do know is we really have to watch it if we live in Texas over the next couple of days along those coastal areas and in through Houston.
Yeah, they could be dealing with beta already off of the list here, the named list for 2020, and onto the backup list, the Greek alphabet. High surf advisory. We're showing you Puerto Rico, not expecting any imminent anything, frankly, weather-wise, but byproducts of the weather. What I mean by that, winds from a storm far away, Hurricane Teddy, generating some strong waves that will impact the beaches here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the north-facing and east-facing beaches. This is a very powerful hurricane. It's a Category 4, a major hurricane, 130 miles an hour. It is moving to the northwest at 12 miles an hour. And let's remember this too. I mean, you have, here's the northern Leeward Islands right here, and this center is 525 miles away, right? And we'll be dealing with the high surf in Puerto Rico. So hundreds of miles, those waves will travel, the swells will travel and turn into waves. By all accounts here, it does appear that this will pass just to the east of Bermuda. However, Hurricane Teddy will likely bring some heavy wind or some heavy rain and some strong winds, and there you go. Breaking right now, the National Hurricane Center has seen enough that with the latest update here, the 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern update, we now have Tropical Storm Beta, and for only the second time in history of the naming of storms, has it been necessary, and it has, to go to the Greek alphabet. And already today, Alpha and now Beta named.
That's a buffalo flatbread bullseye for my mouth.
Coming up tonight on Weather Underground, we are tracking tremendous tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin, including a new threat along the Gulf Coast. This time, eastern Texas is on alert. We've got powerful Hurricane Teddy churning in the mid-Atlantic. That's threatening rip currents and coastal flooding to the U.S. eastern seaboard.
And Tropical Storm Wilfred rounding out the list of tropical names for the 2020 season, forcing a rare need to use the Greek alphabet for additional names. We show you where Wilfred is headed, the rare record Alpha has already set, and Beta's threat to the U.S. Not only has 2020 been a very active hurricane season, but another busy year for billion-dollar weather disasters. And the numbers keep going up. Could 2020 set the all-time record? And are we doing enough to combat the staggering costs? Weather Underground starts right now. And welcome in, everyone, a Friday edition of Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis with Jackie Jares, Dr. Rick Knapp with us tonight as well. And a lot going on, Jackie, tonight. I mean, the storms just keep coming fast and furious.
I know, everybody thought TD22 was going to end up being Wilfred, right? And then all of a sudden, Wilfred forms, then we get Alpha, and now finally we have Beta.
We are tracking a very immediate threat to the U.S. We've got Tropical Storm Beta just now named with the newest advisory forecast to be a hurricane, could be making landfall in the western Gulf Coast states. Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, to detail more on this. Dr. Knapp, obviously a squirrely track here. What can you tell our viewers?
Well, this is going to be another category slow storm, and eventually somebody, and maybe a lot of somebodies, could get some significant water and wind impacts from this. But it's going to take some time for this to affect land. But don't tune out over the weekend because things could change, including the fact that there could be tropical storm or hurricane watches, storm surge watches going up later tonight or tomorrow morning. They're not quite up yet, but it's close. 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Now, here's what's really interesting. This morning, there was going to be an Air Force Hurricane Hunter going into the depression, but that plane got affected by lightning, couldn't go into the storm. Now, it's possible that it was actually a tropical storm earlier today when that aircraft couldn't go in. And then, right after that time, subtropical storm Alpha got named after Tropical Storm Wilfred got named, all in the East Atlantic. So if that aircraft had gone in this morning, there might have been enough data to make this Tropical Storm Wilfred before those other storms got named. But that's not going to happen now. Now it gets the name Beta. So we've had 3 systems get a name in the last 6 hours. Amazing year. North-northeast at 9 miles an hour is the motion, but it's not going to stay that way. And it's not going to dedicate itself to moving in any particular direction anytime soon. This part of the track, moving westward over the weekend into early next week, is probably in general the biggest part that we have confidence in, but don't count on this storm following this line down the middle. We're only putting that line there just to kind of show you how close the forecast points are together and to give you a good idea on the timing. It is still forecast to become a hurricane, but it might or might not make it to the coast as a hurricane. Buoy 2 got sustained winds near tropical storm force. That was another reason why they upgraded it to a tropical storm. Not just that, but based on the satellite estimates. A little bit of rain coming into deep South Texas, but the other factor here is it is suffering from a bit of wind shear, and it will be battling some wind shear most of its life. So that should keep the intensity reasonable, but might not prevent it from becoming a hurricane. And some dry air behind this front might also hinder the intensification down the road. Upper level trough in here is what's shearing it and bringing it a little bit to the north and northeast over the next day or so. But then we're going to have a ridge build. There's that trough now. But then we're going to have a ridge, a weak one, build over the southern plains. And that is what is going to edge it toward the west. Not reliably, not very quickly. And then look at the European model. It doesn't really ever go way inland. And then in this model's eye, it eventually rakes much of the Texas coast and even gets into Louisiana. So don't think you're off the hook in Louisiana. You could eventually get this system. Just because you're not in the cone now doesn't mean that won't change. Okay, let's take a look at some of the models. This gives you a little better idea. You know, following that line down the middle of the cone makes it look like there's going to be a smooth track. All of these models, look at how inconsistent the motion is. Expect the cone to change a lot. Expect the intensity forecast to change a lot. When the steering currents are weak, just like with Sally, the models and the humans, we're going to have a lot of trouble getting a good handle on where it's going. Now, winds of tropical storm force expected to start arriving as early as Sunday night. So that might be later tonight. They have to put up a tropical storm, a hurricane, and storm surge watches. Next 5 days, greatest chances of tropical storm conditions are the central and southern portions of the Texas coast, but you can't rule out Houston, can't rule out Lake Charles, eventually down the road. Coastal flood watches are in effect. No storm surge watches yet, but that's probably coming. And then, Mike, the biggest concern I have, again, is water. Now, these totals could end up going higher for some portions of the Texas coast, but the models are already suggesting a foot or more. So we saw in Sally what a slow-moving rainmaker can do. Texas, we could be dealing with something like that this time around as well.
Yeah, in some places exceeded the forecast when you're talking about Sally there by a lot too. So just be prepared. Ultimately, you got to be prepared. Water intrusion could be a very big deal for us. Dr. Knapp, thank you. And we're going to get more from Dr. Knapp coming up here in just a second. But between Tropical Storm Beta, the fact we've run out of a list of hurricane names, we know you've got a ton of questions. So please send them to us. We're going to answer your questions live on the show tonight. Make sure on Facebook and Twitter you're including this hashtag, hurricane questions, and then keep it tuned here. We're going to answer as many as we can tonight. And by the way, it's a long road toward recovery after Hurricane Sally making landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Today, hundreds of cars lined up to get into this gas station. People fueling up their cars. They got to fill up cans so they can get their generators going here. The storm left more than 300,000 customers without power across Alabama and Florida. Actually, I think the number was close to 500,000. But folks, there's obviously always a desperate need for stuff like gasoline in the aftermath of one of these storms. Now, the damage in many places extensive. In a lot of places, you've seen just a ton of water intrusion more than anything else. But to get a better view of what families and first responders are up against, you have to go, I think, to the sky. And that's what the Weather Channel's Dave Malkoff did.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world. Now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80-foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these 2 homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
So Hurricane Sally making landfall 2 days ago, the early morning pre-dawn hours, as a Category 2 with 105-mile-per-hour winds. First landfall in Alabama in 16 years, and that was Ivan before that. It actually happened 16 years to the day. Just remarkable. But then we take you to the sky, give you a little bit different view, show you places that Dave couldn't necessarily show you. Here we are at Fort Morgan Peninsula. This is going to be west of Gulf Shores, Alabama. Look at all the homes that are here, the docks. Some of the docks now missing, taken out by the storm surge. But one thing you'll notice is all the homes are still intact. A lot of these homes are rebuilt after Hurricane Ivan came through. They're all up on stilts. They all meet a new stringent code. But you'll see the water intrusion that's still there. Plenty of water in the backs of these homes. Then you look at some of the resorts right at the beach's edge, right? That's the before. This is the after. The dunes eaten up quite a bit, but did their job, right? You do see a little bit of roof damage here at this resort, but one thing I'll point out, the one thing you had after Ivan is a lot of those resorts that were at the beaches, there was so much surge that they were full of sand afterwards, and most of the first floors of these resorts were taken out. Storm surge came right through and literally just gutted them. Didn't happen this time. Boy, that beach replenishment in the dunes really helping. Here's a look at Gulf Shores. Similar scenario. A lot of the homes still intact. You had water that came in with the surge, you had the flooding, and you had a lot of the dunes that were eaten up, shoreline that's been taken out. Now some of these homes literally sit in the water. But ultimately, I look at how well a lot of these homes withstood the hurricane, Jackie. New, stronger building codes are really working. The problem now is it's just the land is being eaten away.
Yeah, and I wonder if water got into any of those homes. Well, we've got a different battle against nature in California. Nearly 2 weeks after it started, crews are still trying to get the upper hand on the Dorado Fire burning in Los Angeles, just to the east of there. The fire has scorched more than 21,000 acres and is 66% contained. So little by little, we're starting to make progress the last couple of days as the winds have been a little bit calmer here, as well as an increase in humidity. But it's been such a large area, and we continue with this record-setting pace of numbers of acres burned. California alone, we're up over 3 million. Do you remember when we hit 2 million? That was a record, and now we've done that one up to 3 million now. This shows you all the large complexes that have been burning, and these are just the biggest of ones. And we started out just a couple of weeks ago with 1 and then 2 of these complex fires making it into the top 5. And now as we look at the top 5, look at that, every single one from 2020 except for the Mendocino complex in 2018. 2018 used to be the benchmark for the worst wildfire season in recent history. So we have certainly exceeded that in California. We've got red flag warnings and issues in the interior here across parts of the west. The winds are a little bit calmer. Mike's going to talk about the wet weather in the Pacific Northwest that is helping. But right now, more than 24 fires are burning in California just alone. And the cause for the fires vary from human to lightning cause. But one thing is for sure, it's a disaster that's just been years in the making. Meteorologist Carl Parker explains how years of warming planets have fueled the fires.
California's wildfires are more than a crisis. It's actually a series of crises that began nearly a decade ago. California suffered a devastating drought from 2012 to 2016, and according to a report by the American Geophysical Union, rings in very old trees found that the drought was likely the worst in 1,200 years. And the role of climate change is clear. Millions of drought-stressed trees in California forests were low on sap, which is their natural defense against the bark beetle. The beetles took down more than 160 million trees, and that's where some of the largest fires are burning today. Already this year, more than 2 million acres have been scorched, far more than the previous annual record. It's a domino effect that is leading to a public health crisis. Wildfire smoke has been linked to all types of respiratory distress, including COVID-19. Smoke contains very tiny particles that can enter the bloodstream, increasing risks to the heart.
There's certainly work to be done. The overarching problem is higher temperatures, and really the only way to address that is the issue of greenhouse gases and climate change.
These situations vividly illustrate the enormous threat to our future.
Well, there is good news. Rain has arrived in the Pacific Northwest. Thunderstorms even. This is in Beaverton, Oregon last night. Now, while the rain is good news for firefighters, it does bring some new concerns and certainly Dry lightning could be one of those, but another might be mudslides. So let's talk about some of the rain that's coming in for us right now. It's well-placed rain in some locations, especially here in Oregon and up into Washington. Yes, there is some lightning in there, but there is rain that's actually reaching the ground. So there could be maybe, certainly if you get a bolt that's away from the storm, you might get lightning that strikes and causes another fire, but for the most part, there is rain that accompanies these. Now, flash flood watches are in effect as well, and there is some rain happening over the fires. We love to see that, including over the biggest fires in Oregon, but the threat that comes along with that, unfortunately, could be some mud flows and some debris flows, mudslides. But again, the forecast over the next 7 days, finally getting some rain on the places that need it so desperately. Certainly that heavy rain will loosen the soil if you don't have a lot of trees, grown trees, alive trees, bushes, grasses, stuff like that, then you end up getting a lot of sediment that comes down the mountain top, and next thing you know, you've just got a whole slurry of mud and debris and dead stuff, boulders as well, that comes down the hillside. Next thing you know, Jackie, a lot of people are in harm's way if they are downslope of that.
Well, coming up next on Weather Underground, we've got a lot more to get to in the tropics, including our newest Greek name storms, Alpha and Beta, on both sides of the Atlantic Basin. That's coming up next.
Inside the storm, every second counts. Deadline to disaster, tonight on the Weather Channel.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
All right, so much going on in the tropics. We're going to talk about Beta here in just a moment with Dr. Nab. We're going to talk about the other systems out there as well. We've got Hurricane Teddy that spins in the Atlantic right now, Category 3 hurricane, 125-mile-per-hour winds. Puerto Rico's down here to give you some reference, but the storm motion is off to the north and west here and could deal a blow to the island of Bermuda. And we're not taking our eyes off of this thing because there is the possibility it could bring some effects to the northern New England coastline here. As of right now, best track could bring it into the Canadian Maritimes and potentially a landfall in Nova Scotia, with Maine right there being the cutoff, but still potentially as a hurricane going into the north. Look at this kind of odd track here, getting toward Bermuda, then maybe detouring around it, headed back up toward Canada. Again, that could all change quite a bit here depending on the steering currents, but having said that, we still have high surf that's possible on the north-facing shores here of Puerto Rico and then all the Virgin Islands as well. So dangerous times to be in the water. You're going to give this another day or so before that risk comes back down. You can see Bermuda sitting in a tough spot there, but as the hurricane approaches, notice how it's pushed a little bit as the next trough digs in and just slides it a little bit. But tropical storm watches are in effect in Bermuda right now. And here's what's happening. Here comes Teddy, and again, that trough might just nudge it ever so slightly and keep it away from Bermuda. But having said that, watch what happens after that, as it may recurve back to the west a little bit. Right now, Halifax looks to be potentially at risk, but also notice here that I think that coastal Maine Could see some high surf here, maybe even out on the Cape as well. We can see some pretty high surf. So don't take your eyes off of this one just yet. It's a few days away, and things can change left and right here, so we'll keep you up to date. All right, that is what's going on with Teddy. We've got other things out there, including Dr. Nab, a very, I feel like an oddball storm out there, Alpha, that was named today.
Yeah, and Mike, this is another one of those unusual occurrences that rings true when you think back to how unusual 2005 was. We had so many named storms, we got to the Greek alphabet, but also in 2005, we had a hurricane form here way out in the northeast Atlantic and became the first tropical depression ever make landfall on the Iberian Peninsula. And when I saw Alpha form today as a subtropical storm, that's what got me thinking about, my gosh, this is another thing that's like 2005. So here's Teddy that Mike was just talking about. Here's the post-tropical version of what was Hurricane Paulette. But you look way up here in the northeast Atlantic by the UK and by France and Spain, a big non-tropical low. You're saying, well, where's the named storm? Where's the subtropical storm? Got to zoom in a little bit more. Here it is, right off the coast of Portugal. There is that small area of concentrated spin and thunderstorm activity. That is what got designated subtropical storm Alpha this morning, and it has already made landfall as a subtropical storm, winds at 45 miles an hour and falling apart pretty quickly. So I'll show you the cone. This won't take long. There it is. Then it'll be gone, okay? But let's put this in historical context. If you look back at 2005, Vince formed as a subtropical storm right in there, not far from where Alpha did, but then it shortly after that became a hurricane, and then it became the only tropical cyclone to ever come ashore on the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain. Today we've had a subtropical cyclone make landfall there, but it's not the farthest east that we've ever had a hurricane. That would be, Vince. That was the farthest east that a hurricane has ever first formed. And Alpha takes the place of Helene, which used to be the farthest east formation of a named storm. But Jackie, we're setting all kinds of unusual records here in 2020, just like 2005.
We are, and we've got time to go, right? More records likely to be broken. We got the season started early in the month of May, so take a look at that. This shows you all of the storms that we've had that have been named so far this season, and it seems like since I think the third named storm, we have just been breaking record after record after record. We started out a little bit, even though we were early, it took us a while to see more frequent storm. We worked our way towards Faye. Of course, Hannah was a big storm making landfall there, Padre Island. Then we got into the month of August, September. Of course, we've had the busiest one overall. So let's take a look at some of these numbers now and talk about just how significant this really has been. We've been comparing a lot to the 2005 hurricane season, and now we have taken number one, the top place for the most named storms up to this point in the season. 2005, we made it to Zeta, but that was later into the season. We'll see how far we get so far, but so we're ranking number one there. We're ranking number one in terms of the number of hurricanes that have developed. We've had 8 of those now, which is way above average. And then the one thing that we're around average for, Mike, which is interesting, is for major hurricanes. We've only had 2 of those so far. That's Laura, and currently we've got Teddy. So that's 20th place.
We'd be okay if we didn't get any more, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Jackie, thank you. Still to come, no rest for the Gulf Coast. On the heels of Sally, we now have Tropical Storm Beta. We'll show you the areas at risk.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Check this out. Conditions worsen in a matter of seconds. Oh, wow. That tree no match for tropical storm force winds in Vietnam, and it comes crashing right down on that motorcyclist. Fortunately, the person was able to untangle themselves from the branches and were able to seek help. This really shows you just how quickly, though, that things can really go downhill. This storm killed at least 1 person and damaged dozens of homes.
Wow, scene there for sure. Hey, we appreciate you staying with us on Weather Underground tonight. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris. If you're just joining us, a lot has changed in the last day, honestly, just in the last couple of hours, right? We woke up and then all of a sudden, hours later, we've got 3 new named storms.
It's a record, by the way, most named storms in a single day. We now have 3, but out there and you're looking at, Jackie, circles all over the place.
Yeah, so many. Let's get right to our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. He's going to start out with Beta, our latest name and closest to home.
Yeah, Jackie, when I've told people what it was like working at the Hurricane Center in 2005, the first words that would always come out of my mouth was, well, everything was forming. Everything developed. Well, that's the way 2020 has been. And we had multiple days this year where we've had multiple storms that have been named. And Beta is the third of the day, 40 mile an hour. Tropical storm. Now, it's moving pretty quickly right now compared to how slow it's going to be moving. Remember how Sally slowed down as it approached the coast? Beta's going to do the same thing, and that's going to be a long duration event. We just don't know how serious the wind and water is going to be in any particular spot, because I am almost 100% sure that this storm will misbehave to the extent it will not even come close to following this little line down the middle of the cone. It could go farther north in the first couple of days, and that could increase the threat on the central to upper Texas coast. Eventually, Louisiana's probably in the mix one way or another, so don't think you're off the hook just because you're not in the cone yet. And how close it gets to the coast. Does it make landfall? How long does it spend right near the coast? Does it go northeastward eventually offshore or on the coast? So many uncertainties. And you saw it's forecast to become a hurricane, but the intensity forecast is really tricky here because there are some competing factors. But it is forecast to become a hurricane. That's what we got to prepare for wind-wise. And now, look at the timing of when tropical storm force winds are expected to arrive on the Texas coast, assuming it gets far enough west, which it probably will. It's a little more than 48 hours from now on the latest timing. So that's why there's no hurricane watch or storm surge watch yet, but that's coming. And that's either later tonight or early tomorrow morning. Hurricane or tropical storm watches, and then probably some storm surge watches as well. Became a tropical storm in part based on what they see on satellite, in part because buoy number 2 here had sustained winds almost at tropical storm force, and unlikely it measured the strongest wind. So it's blowing around pretty hard out there, and it's going to do so more and more on a consistent basis toward the Texas coast. So eventually we'll have storm surge watches for a good portion of this area, but for now, coastal flood watches, high risk of rip currents. So even if this doesn't make landfall, it's going to be nasty at the beaches and on the coast and on boats. Rainfall, not bad now in deep South Texas. I know you went through Hannah earlier this year. You could be dealing with a lot more to come. Shear from the southwest because of this middle upper level trough that is over Texas and Oklahoma. That's also what's going to bring it track-wise a little bit northeastward for the next day or two. But then, Mike, a ridge develops over Oklahoma and Texas, a weak one, so that brings it slowly toward the coast, and eventually that ridge weakens, and then it goes slowly up the Texas coast, and again, Louisiana is in play here as well. Somebody, Mike, is going to get a lot more wind and water than they think. So people don't discount this because it's a weak tropical storm right now.
Yeah.
Slow movers, as we saw with Sally.
Yeah,
big time.
Exactly. Look at all the storms that have come before that, had overachieved and done some really tremendous damage. Dr. Knabb, thank you. What a season it has been, though, right? We know that Sally made landfall. It was the 8th named storm to make landfall. Record landfalls, by the way, is 9 in a season. That happened back in 1916. We had a pressure drop at landfall, a corresponding wind increase at landfall, and an increase in intensity right up through landfall has been, it seems like, the MO of storms all along. Do you even remember all these? My goodness. I mean, from Bertha, which was the first one, up to now Sally, the most recent one. I mean, it's just been one after another after another. As I was alluding to, the intensity with all these has gone up, and a lot of them up to a landfall even is when they've happened. But there's your 8 landfalling U.S. storms, which is getting close now to the record. And the ACE is starting to tick up as well. When you take a look at the average, Jackie, we're now above average, and we've got more storms already in the pipeline.
Yeah, a long way to go for sure. Well, coming up on Weather Underground, billion-dollar disasters. It's already been a busy year for extreme weather events. We'll tell you what could be next on the list.
Well, this hurricane season has been so 2020. You know what we're talking about, right? We've had 4 landfalling tropical systems in just the last 6 weeks. There was Hurricane Isaias in North Carolina on August 3rd. Fast forward to August 25th, we had Tropical Storm Marco at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Just 2 days later, Hurricane Laura landfall in Cameron, Louisiana as a Category 4. Then just this week, another hit for the Gulf Coast as Hurricane Sally made landfall at Gulf Shores, Alabama as a Category 2 hurricane. Now, the damage caused by those storms, extensive. But will they be added to the list of billion-dollar disasters this year? Outbreaks, Jackie, totaling minimum $10 billion.
Wow. So NOAA's list was just last updated on July 8th, by the way, and it did not include a single tropical storm or hurricane. We really only had Cristobal up by that time. But based on damage estimates, here are a few of the storms that we think could get added to the list. So let's start out with Hurricane Isaias making landfall in Ocean Isle Beach, North Carolina, back on August 3rd. The storm then moved its way up the eastern seaboard, taking down trees and knocking out power to nearly 3 million customers. Early insurance estimates put the cost of this storm at $4 billion in the U.S. Then on August 27th, we had Hurricane Laura struck Cameron Parish, Louisiana. Estimated damage in Louisiana ranges from between $8 to $12 billion, mostly attributed to property damage. And while it's still too early to know the extent of all of the property damage yet caused by Hurricane Sally, estimates to agricultural losses are already beginning to come out. It's believed that Laura devastated more than 757,000 acres of timber and agriculture. That loss has been estimated at a price tag of $1.6 billion. So that's at least 3 more on the list. While tropical systems are often the most expensive natural disasters, they're not necessarily the most frequent. So take a look at this, showing you the type of billion-dollar disaster in what part of the country is most likely. So you can see Florida typically has the most in terms of the tropics, but look at a place like Texas, Louisiana, even at the Carolinas. It's severe storms that typically get your billion-dollar disasters. And in New England, it's wintry weather. In the West, of course, it is the drought and the wildfires. And there you can see we've had 115 of them for severe storms. And Mike, we've got more tropical weather potentially ahead of us.
Tons, no doubt. And based on that list that Jackie just showed you, we think there could be a couple of other different types of disasters that could make the list outside of the tropics. Remember the derecho that struck in the heartland in early August? We saw winds topping 120 miles an hour. This is Marshalltown, Iowa, with the derecho. It hit a dozen different, produced a dozen different tornadoes as well, hit 6 different states. Thousands of trees were toppled, homes and businesses suffered structural damage, semis were tipped over, you name it. Everything a big windstorm would bring you, it brought it. Biggest loss was to Iowa's corn crop. A matter of 14 hours or so, the derecho destroyed $3 billion worth of corn, a financial loss that could take years to recover from. And then you check out the list of billion-dollar disasters that are ongoing in the West. Fires burning across numerous states. They charred hundreds of thousands of acres in California and then Washington and Oregon, totaling millions altogether. The fires have incinerated half a dozen small towns. In the town of Talent here in Oregon, fire retardant not enough to keep this neighborhood from being reduced to ashes. Now, recovering from these billion-dollar disasters, it can take, we know, years. 3 years after Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico, more than 20,000 people still homeless. Today, the Trump administration approved a nearly $13 billion grant to help rebuild the electrical grid and schools that were damaged in the wake of Maria. Bringing back in Jackie, our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. And a lot of people would say, you know, when it comes to infrastructure in this country, we're spending our money in all the wrong places. But you talk about today's announcement, Dr. Knabb. They're going to reinforce the electrical grid, reinforce schools here. This has got to be a step in the right direction because it doesn't seem like we're doing enough to mitigate natural disasters in this country.
Right. It's about building back better and not just repeating the cycle of build, destroy, build back the way it was. You know, and there's 2 major areas in which we can do better. That is, be careful about where we build in the first place and then how strong we build.
And what about existing places, Dr. Knabb? Does it make sense to reinforce or build up some of the infrastructure that we already have?
Sure, and you know, there's been some recent surveys of the American public, and there is a widespread support for paying for making our infrastructure stronger, paying for moving some communities that want to go out of repetitive flood loss locations. And there's been a little bit of money that has been added to the federal budget to increase mitigation spending at the local and state level, but it's a tiny amount compared to what these disasters cost.
Yeah, it's alarming when you think about it. You think about over the course of decades, our society has advanced so much, but the cost and the number of people dying from natural disasters keeps going up decade by decade.
Yeah, we're still more reactive than we are proactive.
And we're in the time of climate change as well.
Right. Hey, once you stick around, everyone, we come back here on Weather Underground. Back to the tropics. They are active once again. 3 named storms just today. We're going to run down those for you coming up.
Inside the storm, every second counts. Deadline to disaster tonight on the Weather Channel.
Coming up at 8 p.m. right after Weather Underground, deadline to disaster. A tornado outbreak erupts over central Iowa in 2018, and an EF3 tornado makes a direct hit on a heavy equipment plant filled with hundreds of workers and guests. Here's a preview.
Oh my God! Houses are being torn to shreds in Bondurant.
No. Oh, man.
Oh, this is gonna hit town!
If you're around the downtown Marshalltown area, you'll take shelter.
It was great timing, you know, for him. He happened to be going by. He had made his delivery there earlier, but he delivers to us pretty much every day, and he knew, hey, they're here. I can go here. He got here like 30 seconds before this hit and got out of his vehicle and ran into our building. It was awe-inspiring.
Wow, make sure you check out Deadline to Disaster. That's next after Weather Underground.
Thank you, Jackie. All right, folks, catch your breath. We have got an update from Dr. Nab on the tropics right now. And Dr. Nab, in a matter of about 6 hours, we got Wilfred, Alpha, and Beta back to back to back here. Let's talk about Beta, the one that might pose the most immediate risk to the U.S. coast.
Yeah, and I can hear it right now. A lot of folks might be saying, oh, it's a tropical storm. It's not going anywhere. I'm not worried about it. Well, if we're really, really, really lucky, this will eventually weaken and most of its hazards will stay offshore. But the chances of that are small. And there are significant chances of wind, water, or both causing a disaster somewhere on the Texas, maybe even, I hope not, for the sake of the folks who went through Laura and so forth, even Louisiana eventually. This is a slow-moving tropical storm, max winds at 40 miles an hour. Do not count on this storm to go right down the middle of the cone on the timeline shown here. It's not going to behave that well. This is just where the forecast points are, but there's going to be a lot of stalling, looping, meandering. It's just not going to be easy to forecast. Sally wasn't. Expect the cone for this one to change. And even the intensity forecast is tricky. It's forecast to become a hurricane, but it may or may not actually reach the coast as a hurricane, or it may get stronger than shown here. Things are really tricky in this one. We're trying to be honest with you when we think the forecast is going to be a challenge, and this one certainly will be. Now, there is a bit of a trough over Texas and Mexico, and that's why it's going to move northward, northeastward for the next day or two. But then we're going to have a ridge form over Oklahoma and Texas. And I have to mention that the Hurricane Center in their 5 p.m. advisory on beta called this ridge a beta blocker, preventing it from going northward, blocking its northward movement. Now, in medicine, a beta blocker is medication to lower your blood pressure. But in Texas, that ridge is going to increase your blood pressure because that is what is going to cause it to come closer to the coast, really close to the coast, maybe inland, maybe just offshore, maybe following the shape of the coastline, and then possibly, eventually, having some kind of effect on Louisiana. Now, we don't have any hurricane or tropical storm or storm surge watches up yet because it's not quite time as best the Hurricane Center can calculate, but later tonight, we might be about 2 days away from tropical storm force winds arriving. So a hurricane watch or storm surge watch or both could go up later tonight. For the moment, we have coastal flood watches, Jackie, but the main problem is going to be the heavy rainfall. The flood risk starts for the whole Texas coast on Sunday.
All right, let's try and get everybody's blood pressure back down with a little bit of good news. How about this, right? Well, the Gulf Coast is bracing for more tropical weather. It's going to be fall for millions of people this weekend, from the Midwest to the East Coast, even into parts of the Southeast. We're talking about bring out the sweaters, pumpkin spice lattes. You will not be shamed if you drink them this weekend, right? Because this really is a taste of fall. In fact, we could even be looking at a few spots with some record low temperatures, believe it or not. So our jet stream taking a little dip here across the Great Lakes and into the Northeast, and that's going to allow high pressure to settle on in and usher in some cooler air, but also some drier air. So that front works its way all the way down into parts of Florida, allowing clearing conditions and getting rid of some of that humidity and moisture left over from Sally. Here are all the dots in the places where we could see some record low temperatures that would at least be in jeopardy. So a place like Binghamton, New York, by tomorrow morning, you could be down there at 34 degrees, getting a little frosty, maybe stay in bed and watch AMHQ on the weekend and weekend recharge. We'll have more on the tropics right after this. Coming up tonight on Weather Underground, we are tracking tremendous tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin, including newly named Tropical Storm Beta that could threaten the Gulf Coast. This time, it's the eastern Texas that is on alert. Plus, we've got powerful Hurricane Teddy. It's churning in the mid-Atlantic, threatening rip currents and coastal flooding to the U.S. eastern seaboard.
And Tropical Storm Wilfred rounding out that list of tropical storm names for the 2020 season, forcing a rare need to go to the Greek alphabet for additional names. We're going to show you where Wilfred is headed. The rare record Alpha has already set, and where Beta could then threaten. And not only has 2020 been a very active hurricane season, another busy year for billion-dollar weather disasters too. And the numbers, they keep going up. Could 2020 set the all-time record? And are we doing enough to combat the staggering costs? Weather Underground starts right now. Welcome in. You're watching a Friday edition of Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis with Jackie Jarris, and Dr. Rick Knapp is with us tonight. And if you've tuned out, the last 24 hours, boy, have you missed a lot, Jackie.
A whole lot. In fact, the names just kept coming out. The second I saw that we had Wilfred out there, I was like, oh, that's going to be our Gulf storm. And I had to stop myself in the middle of the tweet because, psych, it wasn't that one, was it?
And then we thought, okay, well, then the thing in the Gulf of Mexico will be Alpha. Psych again, right?
Psych
then we end up getting this.
And now we've got Beta.
It's nuts. We do have Tropical Storm Beta. It is in the Gulf of Mexico. Does pose a risk to the western Gulf Coast. That cone, I'm sure you've got a lot of questions about it. And so we're going to get you through it tonight. Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, for the latest on Beta. Dr. Knapp, you're always worried about these slow movers, and that's what we think Beta could be.
Yep, and the slow movers are harder to forecast, and for a lesser category or status of system, they can create a bigger water disaster than you might think. Look what Sally did, even though it wasn't a major hurricane on the wind scale. This is going to be another one of those category slow storms that probably isn't going to go according to script that you see on the forecast, because the weaker the steering currents are, as is going to be in this case, the more inconsistent the models are and the harder it is for humans to make a really accurate forecast. But we can give you a pretty good idea of what to prepare for. That's the key here. Moving north-northeast at 9 miles an hour, that's fast compared to how slowly it's going to be moving over the next few days. You do a little quick math. If this forecast was to be exactly right, and it's not going to be, but Monday p.m. to Tuesday p.m., those forecast points equate to 2 miles an hour. So you're back down to Sally speeds as it was coming ashore. So you can't be sure that this is going to stay offshore. Can't be sure it's not going to go farther inland, but you also can't be sure it ain't going to stay offshore longer. And in Louisiana, you certainly can't ignore this. Eventually, I think some aspect of this system is going to affect Louisiana one way or the other. So everybody, you've got to stay tuned in all night tonight, all weekend long, because there are going to be a lot of changes. Look at the models, the tracks from the U.S. Weather Service collection of models. This is a little more representative of how the center of the system might behave. You see how loopy and wobbly and stopping and starting that is, looping around near the coast, offshore, right on land. It's just, you can't really pinpoint what the path is going to be. But I think this part of the track right in here is probably the one we're most confident of, that it's going to get closer to the coast over the weekend into early next week. And so it's going to be dangerously close to many of you in Texas, to the point where we probably will see hurricane watches, tropical storm watches in other places, and storm surge watches go up, if not later tonight, then tomorrow morning, because we're closing in either Sunday night, early Monday morning, on 48 hours in advance of the tropical storm conditions arriving. So things will change, and you will have to start preparing big time over this weekend, maybe for wind, maybe for storm surge, but almost certainly for rain, even if the center stays offshore. Look at what the global models are kicking out. Again, not just inches of rain in the forecast, possibly feet. Might not end up being Corpus Christi, it could, but the Euro model has around a foot of rain in its forecast on land, so does the GFS model. So, Mike, I'm really concerned about places like deep South Texas that got flooded during Hannah, and about the rest of the Texas coast. Houston's in play, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange is in play, and Louisiana is as well.
It's, just because, we've got a cone that takes it toward Texas doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go, like you said, right down the center of that, and it's going to affect exactly what the cone says. Everyone needs to be ready. But we know, Dr. Nab, between beta and then the fact that we've run through the list of names this year, we've got a lot of questions, right? So send your questions in. If you're on Facebook or Twitter, use the hashtag Hurricane Questions. We're going to answer as many of those this evening as we can. Dr. Nab's going to help us out as well. But certainly we know there's been one after another, and a long road to recovery after Sally made landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama this week. Today, hundreds of cars lined up to get gas at this gas station. It's in high demand, right? People fueling up their cars, also gas to run their generators. More than 270,000 customers still without power across Alabama and Florida. Gas, just one of those key supplies that's in demand, along with other things across Florida and Alabama. And meteorologist Paul Goodlow shows us how a lack of power is adding to trouble.
The recovery continues here across the Gulf Coast of Alabama. We're in Orange Beach, Alabama. The Shell station behind me. Well, the irony is they have a fuel truck here delivering fuel, but they have no power to get fuel through the pumps and into your gas tank here. Gas is hard to come by. In fact, we had a crew member out looking for gas and shot this video earlier of long lines. They were moving, though, but they are long because it's difficult to find places that have fuel and have power and are selling that fuel there as well. Power definitely out here on the beach. You can see some of these beautiful condos, great views of the Gulf of Mexico, but there's no power. There's hope. We talked to the mayor today that hopefully sometime today or maybe tomorrow they're going to have power back here to the beach. And also water is out and kind of limited in many areas here. But you can see behind me, we always talk about the calm before the storm. Take a look at the calm after the storm. Look how flat the Gulf of Mexico is. Just over 48 hours ago, we had huge waves, 20, 30-foot waves crashing on shore here with the full front of the right front quadrant of Sally making landfall here. Things are calm now and comfortable, but as we head throughout the next couple of days, the heat and humidity are slowly building back. So getting that power back, getting water back, getting air conditioning back, definitely comforts that we need to continue the recovery from Hurricane Sally.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. We know that Sally was, devastating with the rain. It did have a pretty significant surge. Let's show you where it was. It was in Gulf Shores. Winds were 105, Category 2, first landfall in this area in 16 years, and actually happened 16 years to the date of Ivan. All right, take a look at here at Fort Morgan Peninsula. This just now down the the shoreline here, but it's about 20 miles to the west of Gulf Shores. Look at all the homes that are here, well-fortified homes here, and look at all the docks that they have as well. Then after, boy, a lot of the docks now missing, right, as the storm surge took them out. The homes, most of them seem to be in pretty good shape. They've all got their roofs still. They're built up. A lot of these were taken out during Hurricane Ivan, rebuilt to stronger code, but there is water intrusion in there. That's a big thing. We had so much rain, and we had a lot of surge, and that water just couldn't escape because the surge was going on for hours and hours and hours, in fact, days. Then you take a look at the beach here, beautiful resorts here, beautiful beaches, great dunes. Look at the dunes, though. Look how they really got eroded, but they did their job, right? Protected the hotels. The pools are in great shape. The hotels look good. There is some roof damage right here, but all in all, I'd say that's actually not bad at all. Then you take a look at the homes that are built here in Gulf Shores, most of them right on the water, of course, and you look then at the water. Again, just so much water intrusion that you don't see a ton of beach anymore. There's a lot of beach erosion down here. A lot of homes, roofs are intact. These also, many rebuilt after Ivan to stronger codes, elevated even higher, but a lot of places where there's a ton of water that's come into these neighborhoods here, and in a lot of cases, they've lost their front beach. They've lost their back beach. There's just not much there. Basically, these homes are sitting on water at this point. Sometimes we see that in North Carolina where the beach just gets so eroded, eventually the home's in the water on stilts. And then you take a look at this. Homes are in the water on stilts, built up high, taken the surge. A lot of docks were taken out, but the homes are all still intact. That's just amazing. It shows you here that, Jackie, you can build to withstand the weather, but at some point, Mother Nature's going to win out and take the land right out from underneath your home. Then what do? Then you're Venice. Yeah, then you're going to have to build back for sure. Well, it's a different battle against nature in California. Nearly 2 weeks after it started, crews are still trying to get the upper hand on the Dorado Fire that's burning east of Los Angeles. The fire has scorched over 21,000 acres and is 66% contained. We continue at a record pace here for the number of acres burned in the state of California. Remember when we hit 2 million? That was a record. And now here we are at more than 3 million acres, which have been consumed. And we continue to look at those numbers, and they just continue to grow and grow. None of these fires that you're looking at here have been contained, although progress has been made over the last couple of days. 2018 used to be the benchmark for recent history for records in terms of the numbers of acres burned. And now look at this. The top 5 largest wildfires, only one of them from 2018. Everything else has been from this year so far. Now, fire conditions have improved, especially in the coastal areas and into the Pacific Northwest. But look at the interior. We still have a lot of red flag warnings that are continuing to fly here with gusty conditions and very dry conditions as well. We've got a trough of low pressure, an upper trough that's coming in from the coast that's moving inland. So we'll watch those stronger winds push towards the Four Corners and then eventually towards the Rockies with lighter conditions into the coastal areas. Now, the humidity has been up a little bit in spots. Of course, we tend to see that into the early morning hours, and then in the afternoon, we watch it start to drop off once again. So look at those critical levels. Once you get down below 25%, that's really, really dry. So take a look at the forecast as we head into Sunday afternoon, widespread down into the teens. So we are concerned that any existing fires could really have trouble trying to make any progress on those by the end of the weekend. But things are better in the Pacific Northwest. Mike is going to have more on that in just a minute. In the meantime, we've got more than 24 fires that are burning in California alone. And the cause for the fires varies from human cause to lightning. But one thing is for sure, this is a disaster that's been years in the making. Meteorologist Carl Parker explains how years of warming planet have fueled the fires.
California's wildfires are more than a crisis. It's actually a series of crises that began nearly a decade ago. California suffered a devastating drought from 2012 to 2016, and according to a report by the American Geophysical Union, rings in very old trees found that the drought was likely the worst in 1,200 years. And the role of climate change is clear. Millions of drought-stressed trees in California forests were low on sap, which is their natural defense against the bark beetle. The beetles took down more than 160 million trees, and that's where some of the largest fires are burning today. Already this year, more than 2 million acres have been scorched, far more than the previous annual record. It's a domino effect that is leading to a public health crisis. Wildfire smoke has been linked to all types of respiratory distress, including COVID-19. Smoke contains very tiny particles that can enter the bloodstream, increasing risks to the heart.
There's certainly work to be done. The overarching problem is higher temperatures, and really the only way to address that is the issue of greenhouse gases and climate change.
These situations vividly illustrate the enormous threat to our future.
Well, one thing that's good news is rain has arrived to the Pacific Northwest where the fires are burning. This in Beaverton, Oregon, where not only do we have rain, with thunderstorms too. The rain is good news when it comes to these fires. It's very good news, but there is another concern that comes along with it. Talk about that here in just a second, but on the radar, boy, we have needed this for months, haven't we? We have showery weather and even thunderstorms in Nevada up through Idaho. Idaho has been scorched. And then we've got the rain here through the Cascades, the Siskiyous here. It's just nice to see the rain finally. Yeah, there is some lightning in there, but the rain's getting down to the ground, not necessarily dry lightning for us here. So it's good to see this is happening for us. And it's going to improve our air quality as well. But that rain is happening over large fires here, including the Santiam fire, which is the biggest fire, Riverside Fire, Holiday Fire. The issue now becomes flooding. Flooding could be a real issue for us here, but I love to see this forecast that there's some well-placed rain in there in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and through Montana as well, places where you have large fires burning. All right, that concern is for flooding and mud flows, debris flows that could happen for us because the hillsides have been burned here, so there's not a lot of vegetation left in some of these hillsides where you have trees and natural grasses and bushes and stuff like that. Well, now it's all ash, and so the rain that falls creates a bit of a slurry here, and there's nothing holding the ground in place. And so down it comes, all kinds of debris, feet of mud, boulders, all these kind of things that can really cause some damage. And we've seen this play out before where neighborhoods that are downstream of that are in grave danger of being taken out because there's so much force behind it. And just a trickle of mud could precede a larger flow. It's something to keep an eye on, and a lot of times emergency managers are very in tune with this, and they'll order evacuations if they feel there's a risk to a neighborhood. Move to the nearest high ground in a direction away from the flow. So don't just go farther downstream from the flow because it could just come your way. Go kind of perpendicular. Think of it almost like you would with a rip current, where you go, away from the flow, not against that flow or with the flow. Flow speed averages between 10 and 35 miles per hour. Some can be as fast as 60. And the CDC reports, this is an amazing stat, an average of 25 to 50 people die each year as a result of mudslides. It's a staggering number, a number we do not want to see go up this year, Jackie.
That number a little higher than I was thinking. Well, coming up next on Weather Underground, lots more to get to in the tropics, including our newest Greek name storms, Alpha and Beta, on both sides of the Atlantic Basin. Plus, Hurricane Teddy, a powerful Category 4, churning over the central Atlantic and the threats to the U.S. eastern seaboard. That's
Second counts. Deadline to disaster tonight on the Weather Channel.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
All right, welcome back as we follow the tropics very closely for you. We do have a major hurricane out there. It's Hurricane Teddy. It's at one point was a Category 4. It's now Category 3. Right now, it's just meandering here over the open waters of the Atlantic, well away from Puerto Rico here, Virgin Islands down here. A northwest movement at 14 miles per hour could pose a threat to Bermuda. Could come very close and at least bring them some very gusty conditions there. And if it goes down this track, you know, they may not necessarily get a ton of surge here. They get more of a wind that comes in from the north here, but it's a very fortified island, and they should be able to withstand something like this. But what's the interesting thing about this track is kind of does this little skirt around Bermuda, then heads closer and closer to Canadian Maritimes. Could be looking at a landfall, maybe in Nova Scotia. Wouldn't even completely rule out some effects in New England. We think that some high surf is going to be an issue for you. North shore here of Puerto Rico through the Virgin Islands. So it's going to be another day, I think, before the water's calm enough for you to really feel confident to get out there and swim. But watch the swells that come with this. And then you're going to watch a trough that's going to collide with this. And maybe that's that little nudge that goes to the east. And then as that breaks down, Teddy just as persistent, wants to come right back and head toward land here. Tropical storm watch for us in Bermuda. And there's that trough that digs in that just pushes ever so slightly a Teddy to the east. But then there could be breakdowns in that as we showed you, brings the forecast back toward Canada here. It could be potentially a very serious issue for us here in Halifax. But again, would not rule out at least coastal effects from Cape Cod here, maybe even Long Island, up through down East Maine. These are locations that may see some high surf here. And they're out of the cone right now, but wouldn't say that you're totally off the hook just yet. Give it another day or so. The trend has been for this to go a little bit farther to the east, and we'll like to see that trend continue. Unfortunate for our friends in Canada, but maybe better for places like Maine in particular.